Yeah, all right. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Omed Habib, VP of Marketing here at Tonic.ai. Thanks for joining us. We're here to chat about all things fake data. I am super excited to introduce Youssuf ElKalay, founder, lead engineer of 2038 Labs, a systems and software engineering consulting firm based in Carlsbad, right?
Correct.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, San Diego, beautiful Southern California. Thank you for joining us. So excited to have you. We are going to be chatting about what you've done for iTedium, a company that has had challenges with fake data, hired your services. I don't think they hired you for fake data consulting,
No,
but we're going to be learning about how that topic came up. Welcome, Youssuf.
thank you. Thank you for having me on the webinar.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Just a little bits of information for those of you in the audience who are curious. We do like to keep this super conversational and casual. If you have questions, please ask them in the chat. I will definitely address them. Yusuf and I will probably be also addressing the audience. So if you want to participate, be ready. We would love to make it more casual and conversational. So I'll keep an eye out here on the chat screen, which I'm actually going to bring up right now. All right, there it is. Cool. Youssuf, welcome. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd love to jump in. Let's start here. Tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and who is 2038 Labs?
Yeah, 2038 Labs, as you mentioned, it's a systems and software engineering kind of consultancy. The way that I sort of describe myself to the folks in the industry is I'm a systems engineer that has a software development background. So very big on large scale systems and how do you adapt them, change them, modify them to serve the business needs, and how do you keep kind of costs down. 2038 Labs came out of sort of originally started with some folks that I knew who were working at companies that said, hey, can you help us out with these, kind of small scale projects? And then I started to shift into helping startups extend their runway on cloud expenditure. So a lot of startups out there, they get a lot of credits, sort of with AWS, GCP, et cetera, thrown at them, and then they kind of, typically, unless they have somebody helping them out, they end up in this mode where, oh, I have a $30,000, $40,000 a month bill with AWS. And so that's kind of where I come in to help out with some of that. And it's a combination of performance engineering, taking a look at their existing development stack, and training as well for their existing resources to say, how do we, what kind of tools can we use to do things like use a specific instance or compute resource or what have you for that purpose, set it up, tear it down, instead of just kind of keeping everything out there permanently.
You said something interesting earlier. Thank you for that. You said that you're systems engineer with a software background, which I think makes you kind of with an emphasis on obviously corporate strategy, kind of a triple threat there. And from your background, you've done systems administration, you've done a lot of DevOps engineering.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you've also built software itself. Do you find that a lot of companies are implementing DevOps methodologies correctly, or are there flaws in their understanding of what DevOps is?
I think it depends on the type of company that you're talking about. These days, the DevOps sort of name or concept is, it's been around for a while. What I do think that a lot of companies get wrong is they think that a tool is going to solve all their problems. At its core, DevOps is a cultural, organizational kind of movement, for lack of a better word. The idea is you bring teams together, whether it's software developers, operations engineers, they're all working towards a common goal. And so oftentimes I do find that companies get into this mode where they say, okay, well, we're just going to go get this tool and it's going to solve all of our problems. If they have organizational slash cultural related. And when I say cultural, as related to how teams interact with each other, how they accomplish various business initiatives, then yeah, the tool might help initially, but at the end of the day, there's a human being or human beings that are doing the work. So solving that problem of getting the right, like I said, culture and organization set up, from my perspective, is key before you go out and invest in a tool or a set of tools.
So you've been doing this professionally as well. You were at Bridgepoint Education. You were at Iron Mountain. Most recently, you were at ServiceNow as well. No stranger to the role of DevOps. Are you finding that companies are doing it right? I mean, if you do DevOps correctly, is it effective?
It is. It is, and I think it's one of those things that. Again, every company is going to implement it slightly differently because their organization may be structured a little differently. But yeah, it definitely is a beneficial concept to invest time in. I will say though, it's a paradigm shift. There is a paradigm shift associated with getting teams that are typically siloed from each other to start working together, and that takes time. It isn't something that can be done in a month, maybe even a year. I think you can certainly accomplish a lot in a year, but it's one of those things that definitely takes time to build and foster in an organization.
I want to ask you a question, but I also like to ask the audience the same question. So if you have an answer to this question, feel free to put it in the chat. My question for you is, and this is totally unscripted, unprompted, so I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. What are some of your favorite tools within the DevOps toolkit? It could be anything. Tonic, we obviously know is part of that, so you don't have to say Tonic. But anything else in your arsenal that you really enjoy lately?
Wow, that's a great question. I think lately, probably the tools that are coming out of HashiCorp. Terraform, Vault, those Vagrant, although I don't use Vagrant as much anymore, but they're open source. They're really solid tools that I think that if it makes sense for your organization to definitely explore using or consider using. On the container front, Docker. I use Docker very heavily even for my own. Personal work. I try to containerize pretty much everything and anything that I can. Anything else on the DevOps side? Those are the two big, I guess, names that are out there that I just thought on the top of my head.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for answering that. Tell us about iTedium. They were and I think maybe still are a client of yours.
Yes.
What was the background behind that relationship? What were the challenges there?
So they approached me, and initially this whole thing started off as we're spending X amount of dollars in AWS. The bill's getting out of hand. We need to rein this in. Can you come help us do this? And as I started to kind of go down that path of looking at what type of how they build their software, what their core business is, etc. I always had in the back of my mind, because they work in a regulated, more specifically HIPAA space, that they were going to need something like Tonic to be able to come in and shore up a lot of the system level resources that they were using, and effectively spending quite a significant amount of money on to be able to maintain regulatory compliance with HIPAA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So naturally you come in there, and there were some challenges that you come across. What were the challenges specifically that prompted you to consider a tool like Tonic?
I think the big thing, the first thing that comes to mind is they have an international team that they work with of
software engineers.
Correct, yes, of software engineers, including the test engineers that they work with to be able to build and test the software. So um, obviously they have this production data sitting there. They don't really necessarily need access to the production data, but they have to kind of jump through a lot of security-oriented hoops. So that means running virtual machines in the cloud, stateside. Um, VPN, tunnel connection. So a lot of layers to be able to effectively do their software development. And security is great. It's very important. Don't get me wrong. But once you add all those layers, you start to slow software development and test engineering down. And like I said, in the back of my mind, I always thought, okay, well, really what they need is a framework or a tool that would allow them not only to generate synthetic data, but also manage the databases that their developers and engineers are working with.
Okay, so let's pause really quick and just talk about what you just said. I think what you're describing essentially is what every company is challenged with today, is building a modern optimized CI/CD pipeline. How do I get code from literally my brain onto a keyboard, checked into Git, and then all the different stages it has to go through, and then eventually deploy it into production? Most people don't understand that this conveyor belt process is what every company is trying to implement, and every company right now is having a lot of problems. I asked you a question earlier about your favorite tool. I think that my favorite tool today is, like, I don't know, we would call it Jenkins 2.0. It's all of the CI/CD orchestration tools. So it's the Argos and like the harnesses of the world that can orchestrate code from check-in all the way into deployment. And I think that they do it pretty well. But what they can't solve for is every stage of the process. Your code gets checked in, you have to QA that code. All right, okay, so you have this team that's setting up all of these ephemeral environments, or maybe they're static environments, it doesn't really matter, but they have to recreate an environment that looks, acts, and feels like production as close as possible. I imagine iTedium had a similar scenario where, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to lead the witness here, but I imagine they had a similar scenario where they were able to recreate a QA environment, but the one missing piece was the test data.
Correct. Yeah.
Is that fair? All right. So tell us about the qualification process. What was it that what were the feature sets that were required in order to solve this problem?
I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is just a sort of centralized method or web application, for lack of a better word, to be able to manage these different data sets. So prior to Tonic, what they were doing is basically you had one or two resources on the development side who would say, okay, I have a database dump taken at a point in time, typically not really tracked as far as like, when it was taken, and then somebody would have to go in and basically apply that to different environments. And so what inevitably ends up happening with that is, unless somebody's actually keeping track of when they took that database dump, even down to the actual database schema itself, like what are sort of the differences, you get into a whole sort of bunch of kind of like what I like to consider operational and such DB management type challenges. So they wanted to, I think, be able to do away with that and have a centralized location or a method, in this case, a tool like the Tonic web application, to be able to kind of manage all of that. Effectively, where basically their teams really wouldn't have to think about it. So you'd have the administrator or the resource that's handling Tonic, and they go through, they go through the setup process and basically say, okay, here's the source database, here's the destination database, and then you have downstream consumers who pretty much don't really have to think about it. That was one of their big requirements, to say, like, we just want something seamless that works with our existing infrastructure and something that can tie into the existing CI/CD pipelines.
I'm going to ask you a bit of a loaded question here. You may or may not know the answer to this question, but how did if you do know how did iTedium try to solve for this problem prior to Tonic, and why was that not good enough?
I think one of the things that they tried to do was to come up with their own framework for generating, not only generating synthetic data, but management of it. I was told that there was some set of scripts that were written, but it kind of fell through because people weren't really using it, or anytime the script would have to get updated, people would forget to use it or what have you. So when I say a framework, I use that term very loosely, in that the emphasis was put more on generation of the data rather than the governance that comes around it. And I think that's something that when I approached iTedium and talked to them about what Tonic provides, I said to them, I said, you not only get the data generation portion of it, but really the governance, which isn't something you could just build in a day. You may be able to spend a week or two scripting on some, fairly simplistic data generation, maybe something to kind of, a very simple, basic front end on top of that. But the governance is a whole separate area that it's not trivial to build. And
Yeah.
to, especially if you were to build something homegrown, that isn't something trivial to build.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like how you just said that you can maybe solve for creating data, but you cannot solve for the governance behind it. Walk us through what the pilot looked like.
Yeah. No, the pilot was really interesting. So, I was working with one of their lead software engineers. He was definitely kept abreast of kind of what the tool does. And we basically took one of their sort of test environments. We wired up Tonic into it. He was really impressed with how the tool was easy to use. And then we had to go through a testing phase. This happened purely by accident, where I don't know if this was a communication error on my part or his part. The test engineers weren't notified that their data set had been replaced by something that was being managed and generated by Tonic. And he came back to me and said, "Hey, do you think should we communicate this out to the test engineers?" And I said, "You know what? Let's not do that. Let's just as an experiment, because I'm very curious. Let's let them do their run their long-minute tests and their manual tests and what have you, and see what happens." And the result was just incredible, to say the least.
Nobody knew the difference.
Nobody knew the difference. Nobody knew. They were actually, I remember sitting on a call with the lead software engineer, a couple of the test engineers, and they said, "Yeah, we didn't know any better. Like even just looking at the data itself, they basically said, oh, this is synthetic data. Okay, that's cool." So yeah, it was literally drop in, and to me that was exciting. It was also very exciting for the stakeholders involved, especially from the business side. They were concerned about, like, okay, so we get this tool. How long is it going to take for us to train our people on how to use it? Really, the training cycle was minimal, to say the least. And as I said, the test engineers, they didn't even have to think about it. It was just drop in and it worked, and they were able to run their tests as if they were basically going about their standard day-to-day work cycle.
I gotta tell you, I love this one particular anecdote in this case study. So let's just pause for a second. So number one, you have zero business interruption, right? So it's like there's absolutely zero learning curve. There's no your QA cycles, everything you built so far, the functional test, unit test, integration test, everything, all of it just continues business as normal.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have the business benefit of still having HIPAA compliant, de-identified data, right? That is absolutely as functional as the real thing, not not a penny less. And it's so realistic, not just in how it looks, but also how it behaves and functions, that
Mm.
none of the pre-production staff engineers had any interruptions in their workflow, whether manual or automated. Um, right, and so software was continuing through the pipelines as normal.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, basically, I mean, really the only I guess time that was spent was getting Tonic set up and actually getting the data generated, getting it linked up to the source database, etc. But as far as the actual any notable impact to the overall development lifecycle, no, there was, uh, and if there was any, it was negligible at best.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. Thank you for sharing that story. I may have asked you this question. I can't remember. Was Tonic integrated into any tools within their existing stack, like Jenkins or anything like that?
That's I believe that's something in progress. We're still working
Mm-hmm.
towards doing that. I think they have started to sort of expose access to the Tonic web application to some of their test engineers to be able to kind of do like have a more self-service approach. But yeah, actually integrating that as part of into their full kind of CI/CD process. It's when I say integrated, I mean in an automated fashion. That's a to-do item, still a to-do item
Yeah.
on their side. I mean, they're happy with just for the time being keeping this as a manual process. We'll definitely explore potentially in the future integrating that with CI/CD.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. There's a question that just came through. I'd love to ask this, if you don't mind. What kind of ROI was measured using Tonic? Um, that's the question. It sounds kind of vague, but I imagine by ROI what they're probably talking about is productivity savings. Any of the above, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So from a return on investment standpoint, I think the big thing was not having to have these what I like to call disparate or sort of static environments up and running with, specifically I'm talking about databases with various snapshots of the production database. Um, there was that, and then really the and this is something hard to kind of put a dollar amount on, but the potential for some sort of a data breach. So if a data breach were to occur, uh, with using a sort of a production database, it's really difficult, I think, to put a dollar amount. I do know that the Health and Human Services, the folks who at least here in the United States, the sort of built HIPAA and enforce it, the fines are pretty steep. And when I say steep, I think they started around $50,000 per incident and could go all the way up to a million plus. So, think of it as in specific to iTedium's cases, reducing the number of compute resources that they had to use, but also fully mitigating that risk. If there was a data breach, the data there, it's not real data. It's not real customer data or patient data or what have you. And so yeah, I don't know if that answers that question. It's a little tough to put a dollar amount to it, but certainly I think if you were especially to talk about expectations of auditors who come in an audit organization, their insurance premiums I believe do go down. By how much I don't know. But really, those are the sort of three items that I would say that you would get your return on investment on.
I think you hit the nail on the head on that question. I actually wasn't even thinking about along those lines. Usually, when you look at as engineers and even as like, business analysts, when we look at the ROI of software, we're usually looking at, all right, well, how many people does this replace? How much headcount can I drop? How much time does it save? Let me calculate, my average cost per hour per resource, times X, and then just, compare, A versus B. But what we're also not taking into consideration is the likelihood, like you just said, the likelihood of a data breach. And if that were to happen, the possible fines in that event, not to mention the brand damage, right? I mean, this is kind of like an intangible, but imagine, having a really bad PR nightmare where it's like, oh yeah, like some company who's regulated by HIPAA just happened to, violate HIPAA. Now all of your personal health information is out there. I think iTedium actually has to store to a certain number of years health
Yes.
information. So not only do you have risky data, but you're actually required to store it, right? Which is a huge liability. It's like, I don't want to have to store it because if that data gets out, now I got a huge liability on my hands.
Oh.
And then finally, you said something very interesting about how, okay, so you have SOC compliance, HIPAA compliance, GDPR compliance. But then when auditors come in from any of the above third-party firms and do an audit and they find bad data practice, oh, snap, you guys are using production data and testing. That's a massive liability. Now your cyber liability insurance goes up. Not the first time I've actually heard this before. So if you're following bad practice, you have a massively expensive, insurance premium. I actually was getting a quote recently for homeowners insurance, and they ask you a question. They say, "Do you have a trampoline in your backyard?"
Oh,
yeah, they literally ask you that question in addition to a pool and I think a few other things. But it's like, of all the things, the actuaries determined that a trampoline has a high correlation, probably, some kind of claim. Anyway, it was interesting, but it's like, dude, if you're following bad practice and you have like a walking war zone in your backyard, in this case, a trampoline, your insurance premium is going to go up. Yep. If you are using production data in testing environments, insurance companies are not dumb. The actuaries have figured out that there's a massive liability here. Your insurance premium is going to go up. Yeah. Anyway, that was super interesting. It's the data equivalent of having a trampoline in your pre-prod environment.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, it also discourages me from ever considering buying a trampoline for the kids. But anyway, different conversation. They probably know something that I don't know. Anyway, Youssuf, I can't thank you enough. Tell us about what the world looks like today at iTedium now that they have Tonic.
Yeah. Stress levels, I would say, are down, especially from the business owners. Now, if and when they do go through an audit process, they very confidently say the production data, it's only sitting in production. There's a very limited subset. When I say a limited subset, number of individuals that you can probably count on one hand that have access to production data. And they have a repeatable process by way of Tonic to be able to take any changes that are made in production, schema changes, what have you, and replicate that in a very safe manner across different environments. So yeah, definitely I would say the stress levels associated with insurance premiums going up and what have you. Obviously, as we talked about, the last thing a business owner wants to worry about is having a data breach. So that's gone completely. And on the development side, I think it's more, it's kind of an interesting. It's an interesting shift. Now that they're using Tonic, there's a lot more confidence in being able to say, okay. Yeah, before when we were sort of taking snapshots at different points of time and applying them, now we know that okay, this destination database has this particular snapshot of the database at this point in time. It's if anybody needs to hop onto the Tonic web app, they can do that. They can determine what that is, and it's that process in addition to the governance that I talked about earlier. So I think from a process standpoint, there's a level of efficiency that was built in that the development team is very excited about. And now it's just kind of like, second nature to them. Oh yeah, there's been a change in production to, development team rolled out a change. Yeah, sure, we'll be able to get the latest snapshot of data and then have that federated out or pushed out to whatever QA or test engineering database. It's almost become, like I said, it's second nature, like breathing. Nobody has to kind of think about it.
Yep.
It's just business as usual now.
Interesting question I want to squeeze in really quick here from the audience. Who runs and maintains Tonic? I think what they're asking is who's the administrator of it?
Yeah. So in iTedium's case, it's a joint effort between their sort of DevOps ops engineer and their lead developer. But I think, depending on your organization, more than likely you'd probably have some sort of either an ops or infrastructure engineer, maintaining it, and then the consumers of that of the actual Tonic managed data could be a wide variety of people. Development could be, if you have data scientists, they could potentially benefit from it. You could have folks who I worked with folks in marketing who they write SQL queries, and so maybe they may need access to it. So yeah, the downstream consumers are, it widely depends on the organization, but primarily, to pull this back to the original question, I would say some type of an infrastructure engineer / ops engineering resource.
Thank you for that. One other question here: did you have any challenges during the pilot with the Tonic product itself?
Yeah, I know. So we I think iTedium runs Aurora RDS. We had a minor snafu the Tonic took care of. Just it was a minor. I don't remember what the particular issue was, but other than that, I'm trying to think.
It was a connection problem, right?
Yeah, I think there was some sort of a connection, either connection pool or some sort of
Yep.
just because of the way that Aurora specifically works. For folks that don't know, Aurora is AWS's, how do I say this, sort of managed version of MySQL. They have their own software to support splitting between read-write nodes and stuff. And so I think initially when we started the pilot, there was some connectivity issues, but yeah, your team was able to figure the issue out, and then we were able to continue the sort of sandboxing or test process or evaluation process.
Thank you. You may have actually already answered this next question here, but what are the databases that iTedium deploys?
Primarily MySQL. I believe that there was some talk of looking at a NoSQL. I don't know if it was MongoDB or Cassandra, but primarily MySQL. I believe it's actually a combination of MySQL 5, 6, and for some of the older data sources, and 8.x for the newer data sources.
Got it. Awesome. You might like this question. Is 2038 Labs interested in new clients for consulting? I'm assuming the answer is probably yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. Awesome. I think we're a little bit over time already as it is. Fantastic questions. Youssuf, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you for your time. Congrats on a fantastic project and success with iTedium. So excited to be partnering with you. Hopefully not our last. And thank you for coming today to share the story on iTedium.
Thanks a bunch.
All right. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to everyone who's still dialed in. And if you're watching this afterwards, thank you for watching. Definitely reach out if you have more questions. Tonic.ai. You can also request a demo and request a sandbox. And we are offering free swag as always. So be sure to request it during your demo. Thank you so much, Youssuf.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.